What you are about to see now is the exact moment when the ground began to slip from under Donald Trump's feet. And the central fact is this. A new authoritarian decree has just turned the United States into an institutional battlefield, and the reaction was immediate. In the first 20 seconds of this account, understand this. Patience has run out. In Arizona, the situation reached an absolute boiling point. Republican lawmakers, who believed they were protected inside their bubbles of privilege, were confronted by a chorus of boos so visceral that the walls of the state capitol trembled. The people are not merely dissatisfied. The average citizen has declared open war against the occupation tactics that the central government tried to force down their throats. Seeing federal forces such as ICE and the Border Patrol diverted from their duties to act as tools of intimidation within peaceful communities was the ethical breaking point. The video by Bram Resnick is not merely a journalistic record. It is the death certificate of American complacency. The patience of that voter who values real freedom, not a hollow display of patriotic theatrics, has simply evaporated. We are witnessing an unprecedented political blackmail, in which the occupant of the Oval Office attempts to hijack state prerogatives in exchange for blind obedience. Local Republicans are in a state of panic. They return to their bases and discover that the red carpet has been replaced by public contempt. Party leadership has already begun to admit, in backstage conversations, that the cost of carrying the burden of Trump's strategic stupidity is total annihilation at the ballot box. Brace for impact, because Arizona is just the first domino in a chain that will topple the pretensions of absolute control. The physical and loud resistance we see in the streets is the sign that cabinet decrees do not buy the silence of a nation that has awakened from its trance. While this chaos consumes the streets and plazas, an even darker and more dangerous maneuver is unfolding in the closed corridors of power, aimed directly at the heart of our financial stability. The attempt to destroy the independence of the Federal Reserve is no longer just a backstage rumor. It is a brutal administrative reality. The blackmail against Jerome Powell has escalated to a level that many renowned jurists and economists are already openly classifying as criminal. Donald Trump, driven by a thirst for control that blatantly ignores the most basic laws of economics, authorized the use of the Department of Justice to persecute the man who holds the reins of inflation and the integrity of the dollar. The name you need to remember, the name that history books will record as the architect of disorder, is Bill Nye. He is the enforcer of this institutional filth, the man who turned the Fair Housing Administration into a laboratory for fake dossiers and political persecution. Nye is the same obscure character who tried to smear Adam Schiff and Letitia James, and now he has convinced the regime that the head of the central bank is a traitor simply for carrying out his technical duty to protect the currency. This is open war against the domestic economy, against your savings, and against the future of every hardworking American. Stay focused, because seeing the Department of Justice transformed into a personal law firm for presidential vendettas is the pinnacle of a superpower's degradation. The current investigation is a farce built on flimsy allegations, but the real target is Powell's autonomy. The objective is clear: to intimidate the Fed into forcing an artificial drop in interest rates, aiming to inflate a temporary bubble of political optimism without caring about the inflationary destruction that will follow soon after. Even the most conservative sectors of Wall Street are in deep shock. Bill Nye descended into absurdity by plastering wanted posters with Powell's face, treating the largest economy on the planet as if it were a second-rate Wild West movie set. MAGA Mike Johnson, meanwhile, flees from cameras and hides behind empty, cowardly official statements, proving that he is merely an inert accessory to an institutional crime committed in broad daylight. But Trump's thirst for absolute power ran into a wall of resistance where he least expected it. Inside the Capitol itself, in the very Senate seats he believed he fully controlled. Just as the regime thought it had domesticated all critical voices, heavyweight Republican senators decided that amateurism and irresponsibility had crossed the red line of national security. Tom Tillis and Steve Daines issued an ultimatum that paralyzed White House operations. They announced a systematic blockade of all presidential nominations until this ridiculous witch hunt against the Federal Reserve is immediately halted. It is a mass legislative insurgency, an uprising by those who still respect the Constitution above a cult of personality. Stay alert, because the heavy machinery of the federal government has begun to grind sand and seize up completely. Tillis did not mince words in describing the current administration as a theater of amateurs playing with fire inside a powder keg. The political capital Trump still possessed with moderate sectors was incinerated by delusional proposals, such as the outlandish idea of annexing Greenland or declaring himself president of Venezuela, in a bout of geopolitical delirium. What we are seeing now is open war between the old guard that still understands diplomacy and global alliances, and a group of radical ideologues acting like teenagers on social media. The rift within the Republican Party is no longer a crack. It is an open wound that threatens to divide the American right for generations. Senators admit, under the protection of anonymity, that the current regime has become an existential threat to democracy itself. They watch with disgust the submission of Mike Johnson, who has become a ventriloquist dummy for an Oval Office that has completely lost touch with legal and diplomatic reality. The revolt in the Senate is the antibody the democratic system generated to fight the poison of unchecked authoritarianism. They understood that the only way to restrain a leader who sees himself as an emperor is by cutting the central nerves of his appointment power. The battle for the Fed's independence has thus become the final defensive line of institutional sanity. For those who still believe this is merely a fleeting partisan squabble, look at who is emerging from the shadows to sound the fire alarm. In a move unseen for decades in American history, all former Fed chairs and nearly all former Treasury secretaries signed a joint manifesto denouncing presidential blackmail. They are not warning about a difference of opinion. They are shouting that the American economy is under attack from within the president's own cabinet. Attacking Jerome Powell for political reasons is not just an error of judgment. It is a deliberate act of sabotage against international confidence in the currency that underpins global trade. Hold on tight, because when the architects of the world's financial system unite to issue a warning of this magnitude, it means the abyss has already begun to swallow us. They vehemently denounce the use of the Department of Justice as the armed wing of a personal vendetta, a precedent that destroys the country's judicial credibility. How does the regime respond to this technical outcry? The actual cynicism of Mike Johnson, who repeats like a scratched record that investigations must follow their course, ignore that the evidence was fabricated in Bill Pai's offices. The blunt reality is that Trump wants a submissive lackey at the helm of the Fed so he can print money recklessly and finance his boundless expansionist delusions. However, the containment wall stands firm. John Thune and Mike Crapo have made it clear there will be no replacement for Powell if he is removed by dictatorial whims. Technical and institutional resistance has become an insurmountable obstacle to ambitions of total control. Even Senator Kevin Cramer came forward publicly to state that Powell is not a criminal, and that this persecution is a pathetic distraction to conceal the administration's failure. For the public over 50, who understands the value of stability, this scenario is nothing short of terrifying. Seeing the country led by individuals carrying wanted posters against career public servants is the definitive sign that the regime has lost any trace of moral legitimacy. Finally, we reach the point of no return, the moment when the masks fall away and the bill finally comes due with interest. The boos that began organically in Arizona and transformed into a coordinated rebellion in the Senate are the unappealable verdict of a country that no longer accepts blackmail as a method of governance. Donald Trump crossed the Rubicon by attacking the Federal Reserve and treating historic international allies as enemies in a childish board game. The open war he launched against American democracy now turns against himself, isolating him within his own bubble of power. Trump's isolation in the White House is now visible to the naked eye. He is surrounded only by shadowy figures like Bill Pai and spineless puppets like Mike Johnson. This is the final test, as the coming weeks will represent the ultimate stress test for our fundamental institutions. The resistance we are witnessing today is living proof that America's soul still beats strong, and it simply does not accept authoritarianism disguised as cheap patriotism. The amateurism of persecuting competent technicians for mere personal vengeance mark the end of the line for this decaying regime. Republicans who still retain a shred of judgment have already gotten the message. Those who play with the fire of institutions end up consumed by the blaze. They do not want to be buried under the political rubble Trump is creating with his egocentric fury. The message is clear. The United States is far greater than any aspiring dictator. The independence of the Fed, the honor of the Department of Justice, and the sovereignty of the people are non-negotiable pillars. The boos in Arizona were only the preface to a story now being written by every citizen who refuses to be intimidated by fear tactics. The hour of truth has arrived, and it will show no mercy to those who tried to shred the Constitution to satisfy their own ego. Stay alert and vigilant, because the restoration of sanity is what will ensure future generations still inherit a free nation. Resistance defeated fear. If you can no longer stand this amateurism and this war against our future, your voice is our greatest weapon. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any detail of this historic struggle. Leave your like and answer in the comments. Are you with freedom or with authoritarianism? Share this maximum alert right now.